Bum 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 bum.
Tomatoes?
Hello, welcome to video 4. What is basic AI number 1 from scratch using a behavior tree? So, right here, as you can see, I have a blank scene, and that is what we are going to start with. This is going to be a pretty free-flowing video on what you might do in order to start with using behavior trees for AI to create a basic, simple AI. All I'm going to have it do is search for the player, find the player, and then trigger an event maybe when we get close to the player. And that's it. It's just going to be your basic, simple AI, but how to set it up from scratch. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and cheat a little bit and make a new default level. So we have a little bit of a playing area to start with. I'm going to go ahead and let's resize this up a bit just because we can. And we don't need the Z. And now we've got a larger playing field. Let me take our player and let's move him over a little bit. And then let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. And there we go. We have just our basic player set up to move. Let me go ahead and shut off our light source as movable. And now we should have no errors in the future. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. Actually, that would be the next thing. That would be smart. Let's see, how to AI. And then we'll call this our how to AI map. Okay, so AI, the first thing we're going to need no matter what is we're going to need a navigation volume. Without our navigation volume, we are not going to be able to move. So we need a Nav Mesh Bounds. Let's reset this to default and let's try 2000, see what happens. Not near enough. 4000, there we go. Now our entire area is covered with a nav mesh. So we have our good starting position. So in order for the nav mesh to work, we're going to need an AI. And in order to do that, we're going to need an AI controller and then our character to control with it. So let's start with our AI controller. So let's do a new blueprint class of type AI. Let's find our AI controller here and we'll hit select. And we'll name this one our how to AI controller. Now we're going to need a character, so let's go ahead and do a new blueprint class of character. We'll do the same thing, how to AI character. Let's set up our character pretty quickly here. We're going to do something really simple. We're just going to have a cube for our player. And let's scale him down a little bit in the X, assuming I can actually use the scale tool. There we go. I'll scale them down a bit on the Y. And there we go, that's good enough. Let's also add a sphere component. So in the future, when we add on to these in other videos, we will have a focal point for the front of our character. Since we're not going to be doing much right now, we want to have a front part. Assuming I can resize. There we go. Okay, that was not it. Seriously. I don't know why resizing is not working, but there we go. Okay, seriously. This is not cooperating today. There we go. And we'll move it up. And there we go. Now we'll move it back a little bit. Now we have a focal point. Let's give our character a little bit of color. Let's find one of the ones we have in here. Let's shut off engine. Let's just see one of our default materials. We'll make it green. Okay. Assuming now everything, of course, has to recompile because it's being a giant pain in the butt. Okay, there we go. Let's find our green one since we failed miserably. There we go. So we'll go with green, and we'll go with a red lava right there for a focal point. There we go. So we have our little generic character. Now we're going to need to hook up his controller. So let's go into his class defaults, and here is his AI controller class in the pawn section. And we're going to set this up to our how to controller. So there we go. That is our character actually pretty much set up. If we were to take our character and drop him into our world. He's going to go ahead and use his collision volume to be above, and let's rotate him towards our player to start with, something like that. And there we go. Now if we were to hit play, he's actually not going to do anything. While he has an AI controller, we haven't obviously set up a behavior tree, but we haven't also actually told him to use a behavior tree yet. So that's going to be our next set. We have our Nav Mesh up. We have our player controller set up for our AI. We have our character set up for our AI. Now we need to actually give them something to do. So let's go ahead and do our behavior tree. So we'll go to Artificial Intelligence Behavior Tree. We'll call this one our How to AI Behavior Tree. Now, when we open this up by default, we're going to find a couple things. It's going to grab a behavior Blackboard asset. It's probably not going to be the right one. If you're in a new project, you're going to have none here. So we're going to need a Blackboard. Let's drop out. Let's create a new Blackboard to go with it, because we're going to want to hold the player's object itself. Probably not the location. We'll just go after the player itself and make it easier. So let's go ahead and do a Blackboard for this. AI Blackboard. There we go. And now we have our Blackboard. If we open up our behavior tree, we set our Blackboard. Now we have them linked together and we're good to go. Now you might have an issue here. Let's see what happens. Nope. Okay, we were fine. But sometimes if you come in to your Blackboard initially, like this, you'll find the new key button doesn't work. It does it randomly on the first time you pull it up. If that happens, just close it down and open it back up. It'll work fine. So let's open up our behavior tree here. We need to think about what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is, this is basic. This is your first video. We're just going to have it simply find a location, which is our player, and move to it. And that'll be it. We're going to use this in a modular fashion, and we're going to start adding on in each one, and eventually getting to more advanced topics. So we're going to need our player. So let's add a Blackboard object for our player. We'll add an object. Let's go ahead and name it our player key, because this is our player key, and we'll go ahead and save it. Now here's something you're going to run into. Actors are not objects, and objects are not, well, technically actors are objects, but objects are not actors. So if we were to use our move to node and we wanted to fill in our player as an actor, it's not going to work. It's an annoyance, but it's one of those things you need to work on. So if you are going to use an object key and it's going to be of the actor type, and the node you want is an actor type, we're going to go ahead and want to change our key type over to actor and save it. This is going to allow us to use this key where actors are accepted. That's all we need to do for this. So let's have it go after the player. When it gets to the player, stop for 5 seconds and then repeat. So what we're going to do is a sequence, and our sequence is going to do a task of moving to the player. So we'll do move to, and then we'll do a task of wait. And if you notice, pretty much what I said, as in we're going to do a sequence, moving to the player, and then waiting, is pretty much just generic programming language for exactly what we did in the behavior tree. It's set up nice and simple for what you want to do. Now, what we're going to do here, now we have an issue. So this sets up with a player key, and it's going to move to it. And then we're going to wait 5 seconds. Okay, those seem good enough. Acceptable radius we'll work on a little bit when we run into the error, and I'll show you that issue. But our problem now is, if we run, nothing's still going to happen. And if we actually, I shouldn't have stopped it, we go back here, and we run it, we have two issues. First of all, our behavior tree, well, it's not actually doing anything. And second of all, we have no value for our player key itself. Well, we haven't set up our behavior tree inside of our controller. Our controller doesn't actually know it should be doing anything. This is pretty simple. Well, in our begin play, we can type in behavior tree, and we have run behavior tree. Hopefully it's pretty simple to figure out. We'll set our how to behavior tree here. We'll save it, and we'll actually close it out, and we'll hit run again. Now, we still don't have our player coming after us, but we are running our behavior tree now. If you notice, we have an AI controller set up with the behavior tree, And you notice it bouncing back and forth. Now, since this is a sequence, it should be running this branch and then this branch. But if you notice, it's never getting to our wait branch. Well, that's because this is failing. Why is it failing? Well, our move to is set to none. We don't have a valid move to. Well, let's go ahead and fix the error and then fix the error again. So since we're doing our behavior tree, we should probably make it where it's a little more safe. It's a little more, it has a sanity check. Let's add a decorator. And let's set it to actually check. Oop, that was the wrong. Nope, that was the right decorator. Okay. So let's say it's actually set. Let's make sure. Well, let's rename this first of all. Is player valid? Let's actually make sure our player is valid before we attempt to move to. So if we go ahead and run this time, we're going to find we no longer have it bouncing back and forth between these two sections. You'll notice we have a red. It says value none fail. And because our sequence is failing, this branch fails, which means it pulls up to our sequence. Our sequence is set to go left to right, only succeeding. Once we hit a failure, it will fail itself, and it fails back up. Now, because it's failing on our first branch here, it fails back up to our root, and now our AI is doing nothing. So even though we get the same result, nothing's happening, it's actually different because we're not wasting cycles, we're not continually trying to fire off a move to with an invalid location. So now that we've fixed the problem, let's actually fix the problem so we can actually move. So the issue is our player key is not set. Well, we need to set it. Now, in order to set it, we're going to need to create a service. So let's go ahead and create a new service. We'll use blueprint base. And we'll actually jump back over and rename this really quickly because this is a long, annoying one. So what is this going to be? Let's call it find player. Let's call it, well, actually, let's try to rename it first. Find player service. And there we go. Open it back up, and we have our find player service. Now, with the way our behavior tree is designed, we're going to set it up where it runs. It's going to, let's add our service in here. Find our player using our service, set the player key, Blackboard value, run down here, make sure the player is valid, and then move. Once it's done moving, it'll be successful. It'll come back here, run our next sequence, and then become successful. And at that point in time, it's going to go back as a success, and it's going to continue repeating this sequence. So, since we're not really doing anything advanced here, let's go ahead and not use up too much resources. We're just simply going to find our player when this AI starts and have it continually latch onto that player and never update. So what we're going to want to do is receive activation. And this is going to fire whenever we activate this node. This is pretty simple. Let's get our player controller. That means our player at player 0, keep in mind this is simple, so we're not going to work about multiplayer or any of that stuff. We're just going to get whoever's playing. We're going to get the controller. We're going to get their pawn. So we're going to get the controlled pawn. And then we're going to store that into our Blackboard value. So if we move these over for organization sake, and what we're going to do is set the value. So we set the Blackboard value as an object. Because even though it's an actor, it is still an object. It's just a class of actor. And we're going to set this controlled pawn to there. Now this is going to take care of the first part. When we set the Blackboard value to our pawn, we now need to set which key it is. Now keep in mind what I mentioned during our services video. You're going to need to make sure that this key here is going to match this key here. And we're going to use the service itself to mediate between the two of them. So let's go ahead and cover the easiest way to do this. In our Blackboard values object, we're going to need a Blackboard key selector structure, as you can see there. You can make a new variable and find that, or do it the easy way. Right click on key, promote to variable, and then organize it. We now have the correct thing, which is a Blackboard key. We'll name this, we'll call this our player object, and that is going to be it. If we go back into our behavior tree and our find player service, well, we still can't set it up. Why not? Keep in mind, it needs to be a public variable in order for us to actually set it. So now when we go back to our behavior tree, we now see player object, player key. If we change our player object to match what we want it to, which is only the player key, since we only have one value, now what it's going to do is whenever this runs, it's going to get our controlled pawn, set the value of our controlled pawn to the player object variable. Then the service is going to set the player object variable to the player key Blackboard variable. And now this Blackboard variable will be player key. So if we were to go ahead and run this, we're going to see, well, we have our AI. And our AI is chasing down our player. And since it's set to player key, it's going to continually try to find me. Now keep in mind I do have it set to wait 5 seconds. So after it successfully gets to me, it's going to start waiting for 5 seconds. If we were to look at our behavior tree itself, we'll see that in action. It's moving to the player, it gets to the player, and then it waits 5 seconds. After our 5 seconds is up, it's going to go ahead and it's going to try to get to the player again. Now, since we already had our player, this is going to succeed immediately and then move on back to our waiting. So there's our simple basic service. Well, let's see if we've ran into any issues here. Since I'm using the move to with an actor location, and I'm setting it to stop on overlap, we're good to go. We're not going to run into any issues. The player itself has got a radius that's added to our acceptable radius, and as you notice, it is stopping. Now, if we were to try jumping off the edge, let's see what happens. Well, unfortunately, I don't have our kill Z volume turned on, so let's go ahead and set this to something reasonable like -1,000. It probably should be 100, but let's see what happens. There we go, and we've killed it. Let's go back to our behavior tree, and you'll notice it tried to get to our player. It could not because that value was set to none, so it eventually timed out. It went to our wait node. Our wait node waited 5 seconds. It was successful, so it fired itself all the way back to the top. When we went through here, our player object is now none, which means when we run our decorator, it is going to fail, which means we're going to stop, and now we're all the way back up to the top. And we're back to in the beginning. So let's run through this again and actually watch it in real time so we can just cover exactly how that worked. So we'll hit play. We have it trying to get to me. I run off and I die. You'll notice it continues to try to move. Then it's going to fail because it cannot get to me after its certain timeout period. Because of that, our player key is now set to none. It fails, and we are all the way back to the top. So there we go. That's a simple, easy way. That's a simple, easy AI. It's a couple nodes. It's one of each decorator type, a few tasks, and a service that we created. And all we're doing is setting it to go after the player. In terms of making this better, there will be other videos that will follow up, and we're going to continually add on to these. We'll add things such as having it flee from the player, maybe searching for exits, maybe taking damage and trying to find cover, and we'll continue to expand on our AI series as time goes along. But for now, this is our simple, basic AI with basically a follow system. Let's go ahead and quickly modify this to make it really annoying, just so I can show you a really quick change. Let's remove our wait from here. Let's go ahead and, let's go ahead and run it, and we'll see what happens. It's going to run after our player, and you're actually going to notice it's pretty much never going to let our player go. If we look at our behavior tree, it's continually firing our behavior tree. If this is valid, this will, of course, success, back to start, and it will continue. And it's going to continue over and over. Because we're not waiting on a tick, because we are not doing anything specific or any type of delay or wait period, we are continually firing our move to player. Because we are set up as a move to player as opposed to a location, it will constantly try to get to our player. Now, something you might want to do, of course, since it's a little bit of unfair, we can just run into our character movement, find our max run speed, walk speed, max walk speed. which of course I can never find the first time, so we'll look for walk. There we go, max walk speed. And we'll set this to something silly like 400. And we'll run this again. We'll let it catch up. And of course now you have zombie AI. It's a little bit slower than us, but it's going to constantly be trying to find us. If I was to throw in something like a basic cube and make this a little bit annoying like that and hit play, because we're using navigation and move to, you'll find that it's going to constantly try to seek us out. And it's going to go ahead and path find around as needed. As you notice, instead of going around, it found the closest point because it's constantly recalculating its navigation. There you go. There's our basic AI for our basic behavior tree. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And I hope you look forward to future videos where we expand upon it and make them more intelligent.